What's happening, people? Welcome to part two of this three-part series on how to approach and view life and existence. In part one, I asked if absurdism was the right view and approach. And if you want to know why I don't believe absurdism is the right way, why we shouldn't be absurdists, then check out part one. In this section, in part two, I'm asking if existentialism is the better view, the better philosophy, the better approach. Should we follow existentialist thinking behind people like Sartre, Camus, Kierkegaard, and Heidegger, or should we be nihilist, as I will discuss in part three? So let's dive into existentialism. My name is Lex, and you could call me a philosopher or even a guru because I teach people how to perform existential rehab on themselves. But I simply consider myself a communicator and a student in the art of living well in an unwell world. Welcome to my channel. This philosophy of existentialism, this approach to life and existence, has best been defined as existence precedes essence, in my opinion. That's the simplest, most direct and true definition of existentialism. And that's only to say that what you are is not the product of your essence, some ready-made, pre-existing, granted condition or circumstance. It's not something that is just had. What you are as an individual, who you are, is a result and product of your actions, thoughts, words, and deeds in this world. It is what you make of yourself and not what was made of you. So existentialism is really a strong rebellion against the institutional, the traditional, the orthodox, the social, the political, the economic constraints of a person's world, time, and day for their life. It's just a rebellion and rejection of any notion or any attempt to define me for me. It's not rejecting the world as a thing that holds value. It's just rejecting the world as a thing that can define you. So since there is no objective determination or definition of us, we are burdened with the absolute infinite freedom to be what we are, to be what we want to be, seemingly. So we're free. We're burdened, we're damned and doomed to be free because there is no one, no God, no meaning, no point to this universe to constrain and compress us into specific form. But unlike the absurdists that say that we should simply settle into the absurdity of our existence and revel in it, the existentialists would say that you have a task, you have a job. Mainly, Heidegger would say you have a duty, and that's to live authentically, to take the reins of your own existence in life in your hands and to guide yourself wherever you see fit, wherever you like. And then the sum total of these actions and decisions and experiences will culminate in what you are in your life. That will be what you actually are. And I think that's the approach, that's the philosophy, that's the main crux of what an existentialist should be up to that will differentiate them from an absurdist. Yes, our juxtaposition with the universe is absurd. However, the way we approach our existence isn't just to settle in and let things create and shape us. It's to define ourselves out of infinite possibilities, seemingly, or a variety of possibilities that many people don't consider, to decide what it will be and to make it that. But settling into it in the wrong way, like many people may be inclined to, that's not what Heidegger would say to do, because he sees a person that just simply goes along with the flow, letting society and culture shape them into whatever as an inauthentic person, an inauthentic being. If you don't determine what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, what's right for you, what's best, then you are not living an authentic life. It's just easier, likely. It's just less challenging, less likely to cause friction and tension, and allow you to breeze through this life with less stress and less problems. Well, that's not the way to go. Being an individual may be a problematic thing for many people around you, but that's the only thing you should be. If you're living an authentic life, you should be authentically you and no one else, according to the existentialists. So Heidegger, Sartre, Camus, Kierkegaard, their rejection of prototypical standards and norms and predefined templates for a human being, their rejection of that is something that I'm firmly behind. I am firmly behind the rejection of anyone defining things for you. But we need to be reasonable. If we're going to be reasonable about this, then we also have to accept that there are some natural physical constraints. We cannot say that a person is infinitely free to choose and to be whatever they want to be. I think this rejection of all essence was a mistake by the existentialists. I know it was. And I understand why, because anything that existed previously, prior, necessarily would constrain you. Well, we're constrained. We're human beings. And I think we need to accept that. You cannot be whatever you want to be, no matter how unfree that sounds, that's actually wonderful, because what we would be faced with instead of that is infinite freedom. So much choice that a person would never be able to rightly figure out how to live well, how to live best. It would be, I tried this and it was good, but there was an infinite array of other possibilities. And how do I know that those weren't better? How do I know that these other ways with the infinite possibilities were not the absolute right way for me to live? Well, you don't have to worry about that because you don't have infinite possibilities. You don't have an array of options available to you as a human being in what you can do and what you can be if you're going to be right about this. We need to think of ourselves, in my opinion, as clay. We are clay, and we can mold ourselves as human beings. The essence of a human, call it clay. We can mold ourselves into countless shapes, maybe an uncountable number of different shapes. However, there are limitations on what clay can be. Maybe not very many limitations on the shapes that clay can take, the forms, the images that clay can make and be made into, but there are limitations on what clay can do and what clay can be. This is just a rough generalization, a description of humanity and our predicament, but this is something I think we should adhere to and acknowledge. A person can not be glass if a person's essence is clay. A person can be a bowl or a pot, maybe even a weak and brittle weapon, a sword or whatever, but clay will never be steel. Clay will never be a structural building material in this modern world, unless you're talking about compacting it like you would dense earth. So clay is the limitation. Clay is the constraint. And as human beings, human nature, our physical essence, our physical being, our genetics are the constraint. And then the world is another constraint. So this narrative that a person is burdened with infinite freedom needs to be taken away. You are not burdened with infinite freedom. You have a set amount of freedom based on the nature of clayness, of humanness. And then within that, you will determine what's the right shape for you to take, what's the right thing for you to be. And you shape yourself into that. That's really all you can do. You have degrees of freedom, maybe more than you want, maybe more than you can stomach, but it's not infinite. And as you start to shape your clay into a specific form, a specific self, you start to determine whether this is right, whether this is good, whether this is not right. And you start to mold it. And if you're on the money, if you're sensitive, and if you have enough skill, you can make the exact shape that you want. And that should lead to the best result, the best experience of this existence. And I think that's where the existentialists, the absurdists, and we'll talk about it soon, even the nihilists have erred. They've lost track, lost sight of the fact that the point of this world isn't to discern and define, of this life isn't to discern and define meaning, seemingly, because we don't know the point. And if we can't discern and define meaning from this seemingly meaningless cosmos, we can't decide what we are in some true and real sense. We can't determine that. All we have is an experience, and that will be what it is. And what will be had in that will be the experience of our life. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's ultimately and essentially what we are. So, is existentialism the way? Is it the right approach and philosophy for life or our existence? Well, clearly no. It's not really the right approach for anyone. It wasn't ever the right approach for anyone. It was a great attempt, and we got some great literature out of it. But even Camus, one of the greatest of the existentialists, the absurdists, whatever you want to call him, was on his way toward broadening his perspective. He was investigating Buddhism, and I think if he'd gone a little bit further, a little bit deeper, and had lived a little bit longer, then his writing, his philosophy and approach and perspective on life would have changed drastically and greatly and significantly. When you look at the Eastern philosophies, the things that weren't really well incorporated in Western philosophy, Western academia, when you look at it and you combine the hyper-rational Western with the hyper-intuitive and irrational Eastern, I think you get a much more complete picture of the world. And I think Camus was on his way there. And had he gone there, had he lived once again, he would have seen that the notion of a self, the notion of what I am, what you are, is not knowable or even really much of a concern. Anything that you would think of yourself as, anything that you would define yourself as, has to be just a decision, because a thing is static. A thing is well defined and well parametered and bordered. You are not that. Your experience is not that. Physically, you're not that. Physically, you're not defined precisely. So you aren't really a thing the way that you want to be a thing. You're always ingesting, taking in, evolving, changing, aging, enhancing. So even physically, we cannot define you as a thing. So Buddhism does a great job of dispelling and undermining any notion, any attempt to define a person or even see any justification or reason for defining a person quite thoroughly, quite successfully. And I think when we look at it from a Buddhistic perspective, we see that the whole existentialist program was based in poor understanding, based and rooted and motivated poorly. It was a rejection of external constraints and definitions, but it was in ignorance of the reality that not only should no one define things for us to determine who we are, but we shouldn't be attempting to either because we're in no better position than they are for deciding what things are objectively and absolutely. This notion, like I said before, of labeling, defining, and deciding things is not what we are trying to do in this world. We don't have the perspective on the universe to say that a person is this or a person is that. Clearly, because we don't accept it from others, but we don't have it on ourselves. If we did, we would not be in the bind, the predicament, and the struggle that we are in this life if we had that kind of perspective to say that I am this. Well, don't bother with that. The notion of a self, the notion of an identity is a useful tool. It is a social construct, a social attribute, an asset, but it is not a truthful thing. What you are, what you experience yourself as, what you know yourself as can change, can morph, can evolve from one time period to another, from one culture to another, from one decade to another, from one year or one moment to another, given some traumatic events, experiences, or some grand revelations. All of these things are up for debate, up for change, up for grabs, and always undecided. Historically, they're decided, but they still do not culminate and build toward a real picture of a being, of a self. They're just events and experiences and happenings. They can tell you what this person is experiencing. They can tell you what it's like to be them to a degree, what they may think of, how they may view themselves in a sense, but it can never tell you who they are. In the same way, from the first person perspective, what you did when you were 10, what you did when you were 20, how you've lived, how you've spoken is not who you are. So actions do not lead to essence. And I think that's what the existentialist philosophy and endeavor was ultimately trying to do. This attempt to create a new essence out of actuality is flawed. It's failing. It's just events and happenings that were witnessed and experienced. There's no true truth, no absolute and objective truth to them as far as we can tell, as far as we know. So there's no use in them, no utility in building a true self, a true being. You can build an experienced self, an experienced being, but not truthfully. And I think that's what the existentialists were really trying to get at is who am I truthfully? Who am I in this world? Well, I'm who I make myself. Well, no, that's what you experience, but who you are is unknown. Who you are may not even be describable. Thank you for watching this one. I hope it made sense to you. If not, let me know. Like and subscribe, do all that, and I will see you on the next one. You have a great day. Take care. Later.